Hi, I'm Pastor Wayne with OurCalling, and this is our podcast about homelessness. And today we are talking about race, how it makes us more equipped to serve our brothers and sisters because of our understanding and our appreciation for the differences and the challenges we face with that every single day.
Who is OurCalling? What does OurCalling do to help the homeless?
The nonprofit.
We care with dignity.
OurCalling.
Can't help but think about the definition of Christian.
We connect with intentionality.
Called OurCalling.
It's to OurCalling.
We build community with integrity.
This is OurCalling and our podcast, a word on the streets about homelessness. So I'm Pastor Wayne with OurCalling, and these are some of my team members, co-workers, and today we're talking about race relations, right, and connectivity between the implications of race on the homeless community, not only on the staff that serve, but also the people that we serve. You know, our kids have been around OurCalling all of our lives, and one of the questions that each one of them at different stages have always asked me is, Dad, why are most of the homeless community Black? And that is a question we want to talk about today. But first, let's go around the table and kind of introduce ourselves. Start here with Miss Tori.
Hi, my name is Tori Thompson. I am the Chief Financial Officer here at OurCalling. I am a mother, wife, and a proud grandmother.
My name is Ed Johnson III. I serve as the Director of Programs here at OurCalling. I am a husband, a father, also a local church pastor. So I'm grateful to be here to talk about this topic.
Not only that, Ed, you're Dr. Ed Johnson.
Yes, sir.
You went to Truett and then DTS.
Yes.
And that has some implications as well on how you serve and what you do.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Rodney.
I'm Rodney Lara, and I am the Director of Operations here at OurCalling. I, too, am a father and a husband, and I'm glad to be with you today.
Rodney, you've worked for local church as a senior pastor and other pastoral roles. You also went to DTS. You also were a captain in the Army. That has a lot of connection to your culture and your community.
True, and I'm a proud man from San Antonio, Texas, and pastor the church in a tough area to pastor. That's the west side of Chicago.
Yeah, that's a tough area. I went up there and visited you. It was a little crazy. And Tori, didn't talk about you. You worked at Concord Church for years.
Yes, 12 years at Concord Church, which is south of downtown in the heart of Oak Cliff. I also attended SMU to get my bachelor's, and then I got my master's at Amberton University.
Wow. A lot of brilliant people, plus Wayne. So thank you. Don't use big words because I'll get confused. So the first question is, what are your observations? We'll start with Rodney and Ed. What are the things you guys see here?
You go first.
The things we see
in relation to race.
Yeah. Just in general, in terms of our society. Okay.
And specifically here at OurCalling.
At OurCalling. Yeah, I mean, it's like you said earlier in intro on the topic that, we see a disproportionate number of our people, Black people, who are homeless. And a lot of them are men. A majority of them are, a good portion of them are men. And it's heartbreaking, to be honest with you, just to see it. It's kind of like Paul said, he had a zeal for his own people. It's not that we discount anybody else, but, you appreciate how God has created you, how he's created us, the culture that he's allowed us to be born into, the parents that he allowed us to have, the ancestry, all that wonderful stuff, which is beautiful and rich. But when your people are suffering to some extent, and we'll talk about why they are suffering and why they are homeless, which is not a simple answer, obviously, then that pulls at your heartstrings. And so that's my just initial response in terms of working here and encountering the homeless community and just seeing day in and day out, seeing men and women walk in here who look like us, that use our front doors, as we say, more than our back doors.
Yeah. Some of the observations that I see men, and I'm surprised that they're older men. So I'm talking 55 and up. Surprised to see one of my classmates here from San Antonio one day walk through the door. So that is always shocking to see an older man, a man in a wheelchair, a man on a walker who is homeless. So that is always shocking to me.
Yeah, I would say, too, it's shocking to me that I ran into a guy on the street, not just even in here in the building, but in our search and rescue teams out in the field. You know, I run into a guy last week, name was O. I'm 45, I think, or 46. You know, you forget your age sometimes, I hear.
Yeah, you lie about
when you get
it.
older. And so, but he was right around the same age. And so that's just always shocking to see that, too.
Yeah. There's such a disparity in the community, even in the North and South difference in Dallas. Tori,
Yeah.
what do you see in the disparity between North and South Dallas?
Definitely, like with education. When I was growing up, there were a lot of free programs that were around to kind of help you get into dance, or if you wanted to do baseball or any other field. And like right now, when you look at the educational disparity, there are not a lot of programs on the south side of town like it is on the north side of town. So our children are not getting the exposure, and they're not being taught, you know, financial wealth and all the other stuff. Like when I was in school, they taught you how to write a checkbook, you know, they taught you all of those things, and that doesn't happen anymore. And so, you know, at the end of the day, when you look at South Dallas, there are some people who have never even been out of South Dallas. They don't even know what the other world is, or they've never went north. And so when you talk about education, also jobs, south of Dallas, there are a lot of warehouses. That's it. And so what that means is if you live south of Dallas and you get a job south of Dallas where you live, you're going to be working in a warehouse, which is hard labor, on the body and everything else. There isn't anything that's saying, hey, you can do this, or you can go to school for this, or you can go get a trade for this. I just remember growing up, they had trades. You could do all kind of different trades and make money, but it's not like that anymore. And so when you look north, you have all the corporations, you know, with the office buildings and all of that and the schools and everything else, and you just don't have that south.
Now, Tori, you don't come here as a visitor to South Dallas. You grew up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where'd you go to high school?
South Oak Cliff High School. Back-to-back champions.
Back-to-back state champions.
That's right.
Yeah. I'm so proud of that.
I am.
Wow.
And I live over there still. So I live in an area which is called Wynwood Hills, which when Oak Cliff first started, that was the rich area of Dallas. You have Dallas Cowboy football players staying over there, all type of things. And so, you know, like as the migration hit, you know, we still, it's still a nice area, but we're surrounded by everything else. And so I still live south of Dallas. You know, I just never wanted to move north. I like where I live. I know the culture around there, but I do see that we need a lot of change.
You know, it sounds to me when you talk about the disparity of those that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds almost impossible to dig your way out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You think about it, you know, I don't know if y'all ever saw the movie Claudine, but that's like one of my favorite movies, and it's about a single black mother, and it's Diane Carroll and it's Jane Earl Jones. And so she was on welfare, but she worked. And so she just needed the welfare to kind of help, you know, get along with the kids because she had had different babies. Now, when you look at the welfare system, what it has done to our society is made, you know, some of us just want to live on welfare. And so we don't see any other way out, or we're not trying to get any other way out. All we want to do is get that monthly food stamp, get that check to pay that rent, and then just let our kids run wild with no home training.
Yeah.
So if we focus back on the impact of that on homelessness, we've got some questions here we talked about earlier. How much of a black person's homelessness is due to the systematic, the system, right? All the systematic racism and injustices in the community, and how much of it is based on personal choices, from your opinion?
Well, that's a hard question. because I think it's both and. I just know, like, I think Lara and Ed, when we grew up, we had that grandmother saying, "Don't go and embarrass me."
Yeah.
Your name is important.
Yep.
Yeah, growing up in San Antonio, we didn't have a lot. I grew up on the east side of San Antonio, which when you said that, people knew what was on the east side of the city. But we had a family structure, so I felt fortunate that I was born into the right family. So we didn't have a lot of money, but we had a lot of drive, discipline, and I had a family structure. So I lived with my grandmother, and my mother lived with us as well. But just pride in what you did, hardworking people lived in my neighborhood. And so I feel that structure has diminished. So you don't have a grandmother, you don't have many men around because they're in prison. And so even those soft skills that you need to function as an adult, you just don't get that anymore. And I just had people around me, particularly in school, who just exposed me to books. So books was my way out. And so getting exposed to that just opened up a whole different world for me, which is another thing that I don't see us focusing on a great deal in our education system. Is you can go pro in being an accountant. You can go pro in so many other things besides being a rapper or a ball player. And so I don't see that emphasis as much as I used to.
And I grew up, I came through the crack epidemic. So when I was getting ready to graduate high school, crack just came out of nowhere, pretty much. And so I had, people that I had been in school with in the kindergarten, now they are the biggest dope dealer in the area. And how do you distinguish between that? So you have these 16 and 17-year-old kids with all this money, and then it's two things happening. They're getting killed or they're going to jail.
Yep.
That's the only two things. And what I noticed most back then was a lot of the parent structures that we had was broken because one of the parents were on crack cocaine. And so here you have your friend selling to his best friend's mom or his best friend's dad crack cocaine. And so it just tore the family system up from what we knew. Because what I always grew up with was two-parent home, your grandparents, you went to stay with your grandparents in the summertime. And then, everybody had two-parent homes. Not everybody, but most people. And then when crack came on the scene, it ripped a hole through it, that whole parenting structure. And so then we were left trying to figure out, now that we have these men in jail that have kids that are without them, because every child needs their mother and father. I don't care what anybody says. They can say, yeah, I can raise. No, you can't. Every child needs a mother and father, or at least a mother-father figure in their life to help them. And it just split it down the middle. And I think we're still trying to play catch up on that.
So we've talked about, Wayne, we've talked about the education system. We've talked a little bit about the family structure. And so when those have eroded and you have these men who are in prison and they come out of prison, they've paid their debt to society, they are still paying that debt, because now all of a sudden I'm pretty much relegated to only certain types of jobs. I'm a felon. I can't get an apartment in a nice area. I can't get a decent job. I don't have any education, so I don't have a skill. So now all of a sudden, I'm back into the world of crime. And so now I have a revolving door of in and out of prison. I've torn every door with my family apart, so I can't go back there. And so that's why we see some of our guests with us here.
And I think the family piece is huge, like what you said, Tori and Rodney. The family piece is huge. I grew up in a two-parent home, right? A traditional two-parent home, a father and a mother. And Rodney, one of the things that benefited me was having a father who told me, looked me in the face, Wayne, and said, if there's anything I can tell you, there's a lot I could tell you, but one of the things I want to tell you as your father to a young man is don't get caught up in the prison system. Don't do, like you said, Tori, don't do anything that's going to besmirch or put a blot on our name that's going to be disrespectful towards the family name. You are Johnson, so you need to act like one. So he was my accountability, right? But there was also a sense where he said, son, the system is not geared to make you successful if you get caught up in it. If you get caught up in the system, you get a record, it's going to be hard for you to make it in this life. And so because I had the family structure, I had my father present, not just in the home, but engaged and active, because you can be in the home and still be absent.
Right.
That's right.
You can be absent-minded, right? So you have fathers that can be there, but they're not really there. They're not fully present, not engaged. But my dad, thanks be to God, he was a Christian, which had a lot to do with it, but he was engaged, and that was one of the things that he taught me. And so I knew I can make mistakes, and I'm going to make mistakes, but there are certain mistakes I won't make in terms of crime because I know what my dad taught me.
Exactly. So my mom, I call her Quiet Storm. I would never, ever do anything that I had to call her where she gonna come get me from anything.
She gonna kill you.
She's gonna kill
Absolutely.
me. Absolutely. And I lived with that. I mean, I was like, oh, no, I can't. So that made me make different choices growing up because I was thinking, okay, what would my parents say? But I think also, too, along with, the absent parents and everything else, I just think now this new generation, they don't understand, like, if you don't work now, when you get ready and you get 55, like we see some of our guests walking in the door, you don't have anything. So if you don't work, the most Social Security is going to give you is $500, $600 at the most. Where can you live in Dallas with that?
Yeah, we've met so many people that when they try to apply for SSI or SSDI, especially SSI, Social Security income, that they get just this penance little check because they never put anything in.
Exactly.
All their jobs are under the table,
Exactly.
kind of shade tree kind of stuff, and so it was never connected.
Yeah.
But what you guys are referring to is just this phenomenon. When we meet thousands of people that we work with that are experiencing homelessness, we see this commonality that many of them are homeless because of what happened to them before the age of 10. Right,
Absolutely.
They were on this trajectory at an early age. It's not always because they had only one parent at home, because there's a lot of people that are raised in single-parent families that turn out great. But often it's this horrible lifestyle that's promoted to them. I remember when I was a kid, my dad would teach me how to use a bait caster for fishing, and he would tell me if I can cast across the street, he would take me out on the boat, right? I'm a little kid, and he's teaching me how to fish, teaching me how to do different things. My brother as well. But we have homeless friends that have told me that when they were kids, they were taught how to cook crack in a microwave, right? Mama's boyfriend made them sell drugs on the school parking lot, or they couldn't come home if they didn't make so much. And so what is being instilled to children is not even a lack of values, but it's the wrong values.
It's the wrong value.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's not that we're teaching them the wrong. It's not that we're not teaching them the good things. It's that we're actually teaching them and training them to do the bad things.
They're becoming the parent at an early age.
Yeah.
And that's hard on a child that doesn't have a childhood. That they have to live through somebody abusing them, somebody calling them outside their names, them having to go out and hustle just so they can eat.
Yeah.
Because they don't have food in the house. And so you now have put a child in an adult place that it was never meant to be. And so how do you expect them to recover from that?
Yeah,
it's hard.
One of our staff members, and we won't mention his name, it'll be his story to tell one day, but he was raised in a single-parent home, and he had to help his mom pay rent. So he goes out and looks for a job when he's 14, and what's the only job a young black man in South Dallas can do at 14 to quickly get money? Yeah. And so he gets caught up in this lifestyle, not really out of choice. It's my mom and I need to eat, and we want to stay in a safe place. And so it's just treacherous to watch down this depravity from the disparity in the community.
And so, which begs the question, why does that happen in primarily African American and brown individual neighborhoods. All right, so you've got bad education, you have poor parenting, I've got crime, and now you put on that, I've got a neighborhood that is not attractive to businesses that would bring the kind of money and tax dollars where services could be provided that would put me on a different trajectory. Yeah. You talked about South Dallas, and what's interesting, I'm not a Dallasite, but the first thing I did when I moved to Dallas was I wanted to learn about the city that I was going to make my home. I've lived here in Dallas more than I've ever lived in San Antonio. And so I picked up the book, The Accommodation. And when I picked up that book and it told me about this city, it helped me understand why 60% of the land mass is south of the Trinity, but all of the growth is up north. It helped me understand, I understand what is happening here. And so it's also by design, and we're starting to see that change through gentrification, but the people who have put residency in these neighborhoods are now having to be booted out because they even can't afford to pay the taxes on a neighborhood that 50 years ago they would said that they were relegated to. So it's a hard deal.
Mm-hmm. So let me just ask a question. This is one that we talked about earlier, and the question is, what's the difference between you and them? Right, so what's the difference between someone your age, like the person you saw, who's homeless, right? Or people that you know, or even family members, what is the difference between you and them?
Go ahead. I think for me, my parents just kind of instilled, these are the steps that you take. And they also showed it to me. And I think like for me, me and my brother grew up in the same household, but my brother got in trouble and he went to prison. And my mom, it literally tore her apart because we grew up in the same household. But I think what helped my brother to come back to where he is now, a family man with his own business, and he has grandkids, and you would never know he had been to prison, is that initial thing that God already says. You train up a child in the way they should go, and they won't stray from it. They'll come back to it. Mm-hmm. And I think like when you look at our society, they're not taking their kids to learn about Christ. When we grew up, I don't care what time you went to bed, when Sunday morning came, you was going to church, and you better hold those eyes open with toothpicks or whatever you got to do.
And there was no children's church back then.
And there was no children's church, so you sitting in an adult church about to die.
Someone snatching you up and falling asleep.
Yes, my grandmother is saying, I see all of y'all. But I think like we have taken Christ out of the school. We have taken Christ out of society. And so that was the moral compass that we grew up with that we no longer have. And so we're doing our children a disservice by not teaching them those moral values of please and thank you, and just nobody has to do anything for you. And when they do, just say thank you. Just a simple thank you. So
I think for me, obviously none of us position ourselves as better than anybody. And that's not the question you asked, obviously. It's what makes us different, which I think is a valid question. And so what we mentioned is it doesn't come from a self-righteous standpoint at all, right? We're just trying to look at the practicalities of, what were the differences. And I think it goes back for me, like what Tori said, in our homes, you had a father and a mother, or if you had a single parent, you had the single mom or dad, it was primarily single mom usually, who had enough sense to have their kids around father figures, right? So if that was, uncles, older cousins or whatever it was, grandfathers and all that, they had them around their children to where they could influence them and shape them. And I had that as, so if you compare me to O, I don't know O's full story. But man, what kept me on the right road was, again, I had a father and I had brothers who I looked up to, and they not only told me the right way to go, they showed me. And I learned from my brother's bad choices. So it wasn't just me, you know, and I know people come up, you know, they may be the only child and say they don't have that benefit. But again, I think that role, that parental role, that father figure, that whatever the case may be, a healthy parental figure is just absolutely, it was absolutely life-changing for me. Yeah. I would have went, I have had so many friends, man, that in high school, one went to gangs, went off to the military, got kicked out of the military because he wouldn't follow rules, didn't have a father in his life, went to Houston once he got kicked out of the army and got to a stop sign and start set tripping. That's like gang affiliated stuff where they start doing their signs and different things like that. A car pulled up on the side of him, and those guys didn't know him from Adam, but because he saw the color that they had on was different than the gang that he represented, he decided he wanted to set trip with these guys, and they ended up pulling out guns and killing them on the spot. And so I think about, I mean, yes, there's systemic things. Yes, there's educational things. Like Tori said and Rodney mentioned, it's not an either or, it's a both and. But man, sometimes it comes down to personal decisions that we're making.
True.
That either, in our context, either places a man or woman into homelessness or perpetuates their homelessness, right? So maybe you didn't cause yourself to get into homelessness, right? So maybe somebody else made a choice and did something very traumatic to you that set you on a bad trajectory, and mental health issues and the whole nine, which are legitimate cases. Yeah. But there are others where it's like, man, if you would have made just this one decision here, or these two decisions, or these few decisions, your life would have taken a different path.
Yeah. I think for me, really three things. I think it was the messages that I heard from people who I looked up to, and they were positive messages.
Absolutely.
You're good. You're smart. You going somewhere. I think if you hear that enough, you actually start believing it, right? And then I think too, I think making good choices, right? And I think the thing that I think is missing now is, I think my grandmother and my mother created an environment for me to fail, but it didn't have dire consequences. So you're able, that's the proving ground. That's where you train, you make mistakes, you're able to correct those mistakes, and you're able to do better, right? And then number three, I would say just the exposure. So again, we didn't have a lot of money, but my mother was taking me to the opera. She was taking me to the symphony. I still remember at 3 years old going to the World Fair in San Antonio, Texas. It was the Hemis Fair, came to the great state of Texas. It was just exposure, right? And so I think being exposed and thinking, wait a minute, so that's out there? I could do that? I think those are the things that creates an atmosphere for someone to do better. And I think when those are limited, I think you limit your choices, and here's the thing, I don't think you have hope.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I would add to that. I know we have to probably move on, Wayne, but it's kind of dovetails again into your question of earlier about systemic versus personal choices. Man, and to be honest, Tori and I and Rodney, we were talking the other day about that particular question in various conversations that we've had at various times, and we brought up the fact that our parents and grandparents grew up in an era where the system was absolutely against black people. Mm-hmm. Jim Crow laws.
That's right.
You name it. They had, if you talk about the man, being against that, they had the man that was against them for real. It was outright. There was no subtlety to it. It was not covert. It was out in the open, from government to police to real estate to the whole thing. You stay on this side of the tracks. You cannot come on this side of the tracks. Like, that's your neighborhood. That's, if you want to talk about redlining, that was absolute redlining in its rawest form, right? You can't do it. And yet, our grandparents and parents survived that, and not just survived it, they thrived in it.
And did it with dignity.
Dignity. You had them deprived of so much, right, that you couldn't do certain things. You didn't have access to certain things, but they said, you know what? Fine, we're gonna build our own banks. We're gonna establish our own schools, and they did that. And so there is a part, I think, of us where there's a pride, a good pride, that we want to look at our people and say, man,
they fought hard.
We can do better.
Yeah, and we can do better.
We can do better.
Like, us crying, I don't want to say crying, but us always pointing back to the system as being the culprit of everything. It's like, y'all, come on. We're not saying that there's not vestiges of remnants of certain things, of racist stuff that's going on, but man, if our parents could make it in Jim Crow.
And so, Wayne, you've been to my house, and you know, right in the foyer area of my house, I have a framed picture of two poll tax receipts. One of them is from 1937, and one is from 1938. It's from the house that I grew up in, that my grandmother and grandfather built. They built that house for $2,600, y'all. That was a lot of money.
Yep. Back
then. They built this house, and they received a poll tax from Bexar County every year. The receipt, they had to pay the tax, y'all, to vote.
Right.
$1.25 to vote. Now, I went back and looked, Wayne, $1.25 in 1937 would have been $25. So they felt so hard and so dogged about voting that they went and scraped that $1.25 together and paid the poll tax. And every time I look at it, it reminds me that I come from some folk and I come from some good stock. No excuses. You get to it. We don't want to hear no sniveling and crying. No excuses. You can do it.
There's a picture of me in the Dallas Morning News. So Dallas Morning News, if you ever see this podcast, I'd like to have that picture. But my grandmother was voting. And so I peeked up under the cover, and the photographer took a picture. And I don't know what it was, but it must have been some big event that my grandmother was voting at. And so they did a news article, in the paper on that. But that's just how much voting is important, or was important in our family. And what discourages me is that our people won't even go vote. Like, they won't even register. For those who can register, they won't register. They won't go vote. They don't even want to talk about voting. And I just know how hard it was fought for and what it means. The laws that are made at the city level, you have a chance to vote for it. You have a chance to vote for who you put in office, and they don't even care about it. So some of the choices are ours because we have these privileges, but yet we don't take advantage of it. You can go to school online now. I couldn't do that. I had to go in the classroom. But now you can enroll in school. They're not even making you take the gamut and all those other things to get into school. But yet we don't take advantage of those things that are now. And so sometimes, for me, like Ed and Lara said, we if and and because we like, now wait a minute. Now we do have some stuff that needs to be corrected. Yeah, but then there are other opportunities that you guys don't even try to go for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Tori, because Ed and I were talking about this last week. I was talking, and Jad, I was sharing with them how, the Pell Grant, which is probably some of y'all probably have never heard of before, but the only way I could go to school was on a Pell Grant, right? That was money that the government gave you and said, you don't have to pay this back. We just need you to
Go to school.
Go to school, right? So I get this Pell Grant, and I show up on the campus of Lamar University. I go, do well, and then I do so well that I'm able to get an Army ROTC full ride. But without that money, my life is changed. So my trajectory changed all because of an opportunity, right? And so and a lot of those opportunities in that arena have dried up because a lot of people they've got to get a loan. So our folks can't get a loan. But like you said, there are other opportunities that they could take advantage of that we don't, right? And the last thing, she talked about voting, but the thing with voting is deeper. It's deeper than voting. It's about these are the things that you do to be a decent American.
Yes.
You vote, you pay your taxes, you do the right thing. I don't care if people are looking or not. You do the right thing because that's what you're supposed to do. If you are a decent person and you say you love the Lord, I think that's kind of places that we've been growing up. And we've just seen a change and shift in that.
Absolutely.
So one of the questions here that, we discussed earlier is, and this is kind of a tough question, is who's to blame? Who's to blame for where we are, right? And when we discussed it, we broke it up into two different areas. So what's the church's blame in this, and what's the school's blame in this? And maybe you can think of another, but who do we? I don't know that it's even helpful to figure out who we blame, right? Because that's just a point at somebody else and not pointing back at what we can do about it. But who's to blame for where we are?
You want to go first?
No, go ahead. I'll jump in.
All right. So I think the church does have some blame, and again, this is not my city, but I learned about my city, the city that I love now. But there was a time, Wayne, that black people could not go to First Baptist Church.
No.
You better not go up in there.
No.
And so what was being taught in the church about people that look like me to the congregants? And so what was being taught on Sunday and then what was being lived out on Monday through the rest of the week, right? And so now I've got that piece I've got to deal with. And then I've got to deal with, okay, so what theology are we getting that's off in our churches and learning? And so I think there's some blame and fault on both sides, right? From a church standpoint.
I think the churches play a huge part in it as well, because when you look at slavery, the whole reason why the African American church separated, like it is, it existed to talk about things that they could not talk about outside. And so when you say what's the most segregated day in America, it's Sunday morning. Absolutely. It is very segregated. It's still to this day. And I think, part of it is that both sides use the church for their own cultures. And it's hard for us to try to mend that and get, where we're doing the same thing or worshiping together. I think you're starting to see it more. But I think, initially, like me growing up, it was very segregated. You did not go to a church that was not African American. It was all African American, and I think the same way with white America. You're not going to go to a church that's not all white, and so I think now we're starting to see some changes with that, but that's hard to do because it's so segregated.
Yeah.
And kudos to the big churches for trying to do that.
Absolutely.
Because they are trying. Like Park Cities, I know he does a lot. And so, But it's hard to do because, like I said, that's the most segregated day in America, Sunday morning at church.
Yeah, so I, as I mentioned before, I pastor a local church, planted the church, and we have a fairly diverse congregation. You have whites in our church, we have Hispanics, in our church, and so I do feel like to some degree, maybe historically, the church does bear some responsibility, for like the way that things are in our society, specifically here in Dallas. And I think that a lot of the blame comes in at the point at which churches probably were silent when they should not have been, right? So if your silence is complicity, right? It's complicit. Like if you're silent, it's saying that you agree with what's going on. And I think there are historical cases in which I think the church, in some regard, some segment of the church failed to speak up, right? Not only just speak up in terms of like words, but also in terms of like, right, you said, in terms of example. Like my dad used to teach us, he used to tell us, Tori, like people probably catch more, you catch more than you're taught more, right? Like you'll catch it more than than somebody teaching you. You're taught it by watching somebody, right? And I think there was a lot that happened in that day. The church, in terms of not making friends with the opposite race or ethnicity, not or the sidebar conversations and the water cooler conversations, and you may project one way on Sunday morning, but then Monday through Saturday or Friday, when your life doesn't resemble diversity, right? You're not at the table eating with people. You're not befriending people on both sides. It's just not on one side. And so I think the church can do a better job at that, has done a better job at that, but I do think we have some responsibility to bear in that we are the light of the world. That is, Christ is the light of the world. We reflect Christ to the world. And so, I think we do have something to, some of that responsibility to shoulder.
Yeah, we have a phrase we use here in leadership at OurCalling, and we say, what you tolerate, you endorse.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so for churches back then to tolerate all this injustice, they actually endorsed it, whether they said that or not. And you see that. So if you have this segregation on Sunday mornings, let's say 40 years ago, not only you're not worshiping together, but we're not going to do business together. I'm not going to shop at your store. I'm not going to sell you that piece of property. I'm not going to hire you to work in my place. You're not going to hire me to work in your place. And so, unfortunately, the church started looking like the culture instead of what the body of Christ is supposed to be, where our culture, we don't want the church to look like the culture. We want the culture to look like what the church is supposed to be, which is the body of Christ, which is unity, which is where we come beside each other and love each other. Well, we are a little long-winded, so we're going to break this in half, and I won't point to who most long-winded here. So we're going to have a second episode of this. We'll come back and continue this discussion on another day. So thanks for coming today.